Ahoy! Today we're talking about the SMITE Challenger Circuit as well as what the problems with the Bluestone buff are. These things kind of flow into each other. You may remember I made a video called What We Can Learn from the Pros a while ago. This is similar to that, but for the SCC. If you're unfamiliar with the SCC, that is the league right below the SPL, the SMITE Pro League. So a lot of ex-pros are playing here. So for example, you have almost all of the old rival team with Deathwalker and stuff. You have Adapting, you have Sino, Mask, Baskin, Snoopy, Geno, and Leon playing there. So there's a lot of talent in there, a lot of people that went back to the EU or dropped out of the Pro Leagues for other reasons, but generally very skilled players. And they, much like the Pro League, play their competitive matches, and there are a lot of interesting strategies they apply and items that they use, and that's what I want to talk about a little bit. I looked at the matches from last week and this week, and I figured it would be interesting to see how much of this also translates to the Pro League, which will be starting later today. So we begin with some general info and then go into the individual roles as well as picks and items and whatnot. The first thing is a relic that is making a fair bit of a comeback, and that is Sunder. Sunder is being picked up frequently on support, sometimes on solo laner, sometimes we even had 3 Sunders, just because it is very good at countering certain picks like Nike, like Cthulhu, and also because it can just help you focus down an individual target very, very quickly, before they can utilize other perks to survive longer, like for example Bamba's Hammer. In terms of picks and bans, the top contenders are Sobek, Guan, Tiamat, and Sun Wukong. 3 other guards with frequent bans were Kuang, Erlang, Shen, and Yemoja. And then you also have other bands that are also just frequent picks like Cthulhu, Ratatosker, Nemesis, Heim, Tsuku, Morrigan, Chang'e, Aphrodite, Cama, Skep, Kukulin, Eset, and even a Danzaburo band at some point. This particular one is going to be important when we get to the Hunter section. But first, let's look at the solos. What we see in terms of starts in solos is that there are a few different options. One is the boot start. This is typically for solo laners that want to go into Bamba's Hammer later. So this is something that you'll see a lot on Guan as well as Athena. Then you see people starting with Tainted Steel sometimes, which is just very good if you need to counter a lot of healing, and also a single pickup of Warding Sigil in all the games I looked at. More importantly though, Bluestone Pendant was by far the most popular solo lane starter. And this is where the title of this video comes from. This is Bluestone on the previous patch, on 8.3 bonus balance. This is before the multiple buffs that both the starter and upgrade received in 8.4. In 8.4, the physical power of Bluestone Pendant was increased from 10 to 15 because for some reason it wasn't providing enough early game advantage according to Hi-Res. And the upgrade was buffed even more significantly, increasing the base damage of the passive from 25 to 75. And in the SCC, the upgrade is also frequently built. Keep in mind that the upgrade also provides 45 physical power, 200 health, 30 HP5 and MP5, and deals 7.5% of the target's current health as damage as well. So this has a variety of different beneficial effects. Yet still, Hi-Res decided to buff what seems to be the strongest starter in competitive and a decent upgrade, or decent enough that it's picked up at least and usually not sold. So I could imagine that they'd roll this back a little bit or potentially buff the other starters. Now, there are some interesting picks in solo lane as well. Guan, Kukulin, Tsuku, Sun Wukong, Athena, and Tyr were probably the most popular ones, with Cerberus, Cthulhu, and Cama also being picked a fair bit. Then outside of that, there were also some oddball picks. We saw an Odin pick, we saw a Death Toll and Ninja Tabby Osiris, we saw an Achilles pick, a Bellona with Eye of the Jungle. Deathwalker played this and invaded the blue buff with her 3 on level 1, so he would get that extra early clear in order to steal that blue buff, and a Nike with Bluestone. But the pick that I'm really excited for is another one. Aquarius played Tiamat in solo lane, and he played a build that I find really hard to make work because of the early game. He played Conduit Gem and Shoes of the Magi, and he pulled it off. He pulled it off all the way. You may see a lot of similarities in this build to the one that I made in my guide. This is why it makes me super excited, because I found this build really fun, but really hard to make work. You really have to get to the early game, and he made it. He was against the Cthulhu, to be fair, so it wasn't like the hardest lane to survive in, but I thought it was just really cool to see this happen, and here's the full build as well if you want to see it. And things continue just as spicy in the jungle. Unsurprisingly, the starters that were used here were mostly Bamba's Dagger and Eye of the Jungle, with Bamba's Hammer being the preferred option overall. But yeah, I talked about that in a recent video already if you want to know what the build around that is. But what is really cool and what goes against what a lot of people have in their minds is that there was a Loki game. And Loki carried the game against Accounting Department, which is old rival, so again, the team around Deathwalker -1, and he forced a Loki ban in the next game. He literally carried the game on his shoulders and went 8-1-8 at the end of the game, and it was so cool to see that happening. It wasn't any crazy build or anything, it was just a damage power focus build with Bombas, but it was so nice to finally see this character get the justice of being played on this high level of play. Our Kuang got picked once as well, he was banned quite often, and he was played with a relatively power focused build, only including Eye of the Jungle and Telekine's Ring for attack speed. Gods that were generally picked in jungle were Tsuku, Athena, Set, Nemesis, Camazots, a bit of Cabra, Fenrir, and our Kuang, as well as Ratatoska. When it comes to interesting picks here, there was a village with Eye of the Jungle, where you'd typically expect a Bombas Hammer. But more interestingly, Sino played Eset jungle multiple times with Eye of the Jungle, which I'm assuming is for that early attack speed for the AoE basics for better clear. And he actually had big impact in both games he played her, and won both of those games as well. Keep in mind that this is something that's harder to pull off in your own games because he had the team comp built specifically around that. We'll get to that a little bit later. Hunbats was played by adapting ones, Achilles was played by Mast, and he ran a build with Eye of the Jungle and Golden Blade. Unfortunately that didn't lead to a win. And Erlang Shen with Mannequin Scepter was played once as well, and won that game. It's the only mannequin use I was able to find, and it makes sense. I talked about this a while ago, Cherio made a video about this where he discusses in more detail. Erlang Shen has those AoE cleaves to apply it to minions very quickly, and he also has that high early lockdown that combines very nicely with the aggression from Mannequin. Middle lane also has some interesting stuff going on. Most mages were opting into Sands of Time and then going into Pendulum of Ages. Obviously a little bit of Conduit Jab was still going on for gods that use it well. Outside of that, we also saw Obsidian Shard being picked up a fair bit more in burst builds again. The no starter build exists as well, but is relatively uncommon now. It was typically used for Rod of Tahuti Rush when it was used, but generally most mages preferred Sands of Time or Conduit Gem. We saw a Baba Yaga mid pick with Sands and then Book of Thoth after CDR boots. She went 5-7, but her impact was mostly in late game, as you would expect for a Baba Yaga. The more common picks were things like Scylla, Aphrodite, Tiamat, Morrigan, Janus, Persephone, and Eset, surprisingly doing very well as Chang'e. Tiamat and Chang'e were mostly played with Gem of Focus. We also saw a Merlin pick, and we saw some very interesting oddball picks in Neith and Chiron in mid lane, building into Leather Cowl and then into an early Dominance in order to have that constant ability pressure with the high MP5 from that, I assume. There were also two Soul picks with Sacrificial Shroud. She only really was able to make an impact in late game though. Shang-Kui was picked once with Sacrificial Shroud and didn't work out at all. Along with the Eset jungle pick, there were some other strange mid picks. So we had a Set with a late Bombas Hammer, which worked okay-ish, and then we had a Tsukuyomi with Tainted Amulet against an Aphrodite. So he was looking to steal her heals. That was very interesting. Again, this was with the Eset jungle, so makes for more weird mid picks being possible as well. Thoth was tried in multiple ways, once with Gem of Focus, that was a relatively rough game for him, and then Baskin tried him with Chronos Pendant Rush, and then CDR roots, so a super high CDR focus build from the early game, which makes kind of sense with his one, but that also ended up being a loss. And Ra was picked, Rajin was picked and did pretty well against old rival, but lost against Master Team, so did okay. And Nox mid was picked once, but she didn't really have that much impact. She lost the game and she didn't really feed or anything. It was other lanes that were struggling more, but compared to the enemy team's mid laner, she also didn't really have much of an impact. In carry or ADC, we didn't see as many unusual things. Death Toll was primarily picked up and often combined with Devourer's Gauntlet, which was usually finished before even getting boots. Ikaival made a bit of a comeback, but that's not surprising if you've been playing a little bit of ranked. Silverbench Bow was built at least twice. Gilded Arrow was picked up exactly once, but then sold in late game for Odysseus Bow anyways, and Leather Cull was picked up here once, so it's a very clear Death Toll meta overall. The gods that were primarily picked were Apollo and Chernobog. There was a reasonable amount of Cupid, Anhur, Heimdall, and Jingwei picks as well. We actually saw the heavy pen build being picked up on Cupid once, so that is something that's interesting. And outside of that, there was Shivalanke as an oddball pick. What is also interesting is that Danzaburo was not picked at all. Like I said, he was banned once. He was actually not making any showings. I am guessing that the late game carries are simply valued more in the SCC and that he is a fair bit easier to counter with a coordinated team as well, because he's very easy to gank if you have comps and you know what's going on. In support, the start has shifted a little bit. Most supports are still starting with Sentinel's Gift, and they're getting Hand of the Gods along with that, but now they're getting 4 health pots instead of getting a health chalice, and this allows them to buy the tier 1 of Gauntlet of Thebes, Glowing Emerald, and then to get an early Gauntlet of Thebes. And this is just valued a lot more again. I think people realize that stacking auras is just a very strong thing in general, and there's not really any benefit in not doing it. So that is what we mostly see, which offers a lot of early sustain. Compassion was picked up just a little bit against 3 magical team comps, but you don't run into them all the time. The gods that were primarily picked here were Sobek, head of everyone else, who's the biggest picked and banned god. There was a decent amount of Ymir, Capri and Kumba picks, but then there was also a Terra, a Cabrakan, Kuzenbo, Ares, Qingtian, Tyr, Yemoja and Ganesh, so you get the idea. The support role in terms of picks is very flexible at the moment. We actually had a Serqet support pick as well, which is very, very interesting. She is also getting a buff soon. This buff will not massively impact her in support, but here's the build if you want to try it out. And a little Odin pick was snuck in here as well. He seemed to just show up everywhere just a tiny bit as a specific niche counter pick. So overall, there are some very interesting picks and strategies that you can apply in your games, and we're going to see how different the meta in the SPL will be very soon. If you want to hear more about that when it happens, click like and subscribe, or I will go to my garage, hide in. Thanks to my patrons for making this video possible. That includes That Nick Walker, Donald Ryden, Melancholy Ganger, Dwayne Brennan, Lenter25 Green, Zed the Undead, Nevitz Jr., Rawas, and everyone else you can see here.